A few years ago, I was asked to visit North Yorkshire by a client who lived just on the edge of the south side of the North Yorkshire moors, which is a fabulous landscape, and it's absolutely covered with heather and rolling hills and some small cliff faces as well, which are great for things such as ring ouzel, and they are a really good spot for a lot of wildlife. You've got some bilberry there, it's covered with silver birch, gorse, bear that in mind, that'll come in handy later on as a reference, and these beautiful stunted rowan trees, which of course are growing on the sort of craggy outcrops that are found within this gorgeous landscape. And of course these beautiful red grouse, which have this fantastic call, bit of a gaback gaback gaback, sort of a warning if you like. They really are a fantastic bird and I love seeing them. But it was really to visit these moors, to visit the surrounding landscape where they've got this heather and crossleaf heath and these boulders that are sticking out of the ground, to try and recreate this habitat within a back garden setting. And this is the field just adjacent to what is now Lower Meadow. So if we look at what the meadow looked like to begin with when we first visited, you can see it was a pretty much, not a wasteland, but it was a lot of vegetation that had just sort of overgrown and folded over on itself, a lot of rosebay willow herb, a few nettles, and the rest was just mown lawn, which the client was not so well inclined to want to mow that all the time. Pair of wheatear there on those rocks which are nearby, and these beautiful standing stones, of course, synonymous with the Yorkshire countryside. So we took that inspiration, we went to a local quarry and we found some really nice boulders which we were going to put into the garden. And as you can see now, we started by stripping off the turf and removing that fertile layer, because the idea was to try and recreate some wildflower meadow in the garden and really improve diversity for both the flora and the fauna of the surrounding landscape. So here we were stripping the turf off because everything was so fertile, and for those of you that have followed my videos will know how much I go on about subsoils and poor soils being key for wildflower meadow creation. So the turf is being stripped here, and you can see it's being used to form a bank around the north side of the area that we're going to turn into meadow. And to attain that, we thought we'd take that inspiration that we'd seen in the landscape, as I say, in the moors, and so we went and picked up a load of boulders, which these are limestone boulders, and we thought we would retain that soil and the turf, all the fertile stuff behind, and make a bit of a bank. So no need to dispose of it, no additional cost there. We just got a digger in and just put those rocks in place to make a really nice landscape, which we would then look to plant in between with some of the heather and some of the other wildflowers that we saw on the moorland settings. So as you can see, we did that, but we wanted to get some subsoils out, and look at this hole here. It's just brilliant. It shows you the kind of the depth and the extent to which we went to try and recreate this wildflower meadow by having some subsoils, and that's me just rotivating that land once we'd had the digger over it and got it all level, just to create a nice tilth, what is known as a tilth, or fine seed, seed bed for sowing the wildflower seeds into. Then of course we planted everything up with all the heathers, some hardrush as well, and as you can see we created a copse on the left hand side there, where we actually planted a load of native shrubs and trees to encourage birds into the area. There's some hardrush, replicating what we saw on the moors. And a standing stone, of course, which funnily enough they had one already in the garden, so we put that back in the ground and created these hard crushed stone pathways that would give a real nice bit of structure throughout the area and allow access all year round, of course, which was the key point with that part of the garden. The gorse that we saw on the moors we planted on the back of the bank, and you'll see how well that did shortly. So if we look now, 1 year later, as to just how amazingly well this site has developed. I mean, look at that, it's an absolutely beautiful lush landscape already. All the hardrush and the softrush and the heather in between the banks was growing well. The wildflower meadow was coming out in profusion. You've got some lovely irises that we planted within the meadow near the pond. They had an existing pond which the client wished to put back into the landscape, which I think just really sets it off nicely. I mean, look at that, it's just stunning. And then you've got all the native wildflowers that were coming up, so everything from your birdsfoot trefoils, as we've just seen, and this is that scrub belt just a year on in the background there. So that was all planted with native things such as silver birch, rowan, hazel, guelder rose, and an underplanting of pendulous sedge to deter the rabbits a little bit and protect the trees somewhat. There were a few rabbits on the site, but you can see now that shrub belt is absolutely coming into its own, and there's so many birds that move through there. And I'll put a clip in at the end of this video of the scrub belt, because some of you will have already seen that on one of my previous videos if you've been following me on the channel for a little while. You can see a lovely rowan tree there that in the middle of the shot now that we managed to retain and keep within the meadow, which of course was a nice feature to have and will be full of berries in the autumn for the birds. The mown pathways now throughout the meadow where there aren't the paths, of course, just add to another bucolic dimension, if you like. And here's the heather that we planted in some acidic compost, which was really good for them to get established and just recreate that habitat we found in the moors. Soft rush flowering nicely, and that lovely yellow of the bird's foot trefoil just splaying out over the edges of the pathways, with the oxeye daisies, as you can see there, and the red clover, which create this beautiful mosaic of colour, of course, all within the first year. The bees, of course, absolutely love bird's foot trefoil and oxeye daisies. You can't get a much more picturesque scene than that, just swaying in the breeze. Absolutely beautiful. So as you can see, as a whole, the meadow has come on so well within the first year, and this is only one season's growth. We obviously sowed in the autumn, and this is the following season, and you can see all those varieties of colours which are attracting wildlife already, and bank voles as well, which are now present, and a lot of other voles as well. And it's just fantastic to see the array of wildlife now that, because we manage this site on a yearly basis, that has come into the site. So again, the bees absolutely loving the red clover. Red clover is a fantastic plant for bees. If you can get some in your lawn even, they are a really good resource for so much life. And of course, I mean, it's just, I could look at images like this all day. Really beautiful. And the bird's foot trefoil, of course, is the larval food plant for the common blue butterfly, and they soon moved into the site. And there's a nice image there of one, as you can see, perched on some old cowslip stems, and they are now breeding in the site. So that is a positive effect of what has been the sowing of this wildflower meadow. And there's that standing post again, and the scrub belt, or the coppice belt, looking great in its first autumn. Remember the gorse that was planted? Look at it now, just a couple of years on. This was actually a little bit later on, but the gorse has now had breeding yellow hammer and white throat within it, which is just fantastic within a couple of years. And because of the grassland species we introduced of the grasses, there are now an increased number of meadow brown butterflies, large skippers we had here. We had small skippers a minute ago, and it's just fantastic to see those butterflies moving in. The management is simple, one hay cut a year, and that's it. It couldn't get any easier than that. So if we move on to phase 2 of the project, which was the orchard, now as you can see beforehand, it really was quite an overgrown block of vegetation, almost inaccessible in parts, because it was a lot of prunus species, so damsons and blackthorn, which had grown so densely that actually it became impractical to manage. And it wasn't actually that good as a habitat for wildlife, because of course the bird nesting potential is gone, because all these stems become very leggy, and of course it doesn't offer much protection for nesting bird species. There was a lovely dry stone wall, but the clients wanted this area redeveloped into a bit of a seating area around the back, so we stripped it all away from causing some damp on the back of the garage, and we'll show you a picture of that in a moment. But first it was time to tackle the jungle, shall we say. So we came in, brought the chipper in, and we removed a lot of the vegetation, probably 70% of the trees, retained the older ones, kept all the logs of course, kept all the wood chip, because they will come in later on in their own when we start replanting and recreating some of the habitats. But we dug a lot of the roots out. These trees spread by suckers, so we needed to get a lot of the roots out to get back to square one. And we of course used all the dead wood and the rotting logs that we found to create these brilliant little habitat piles throughout the woodland glade. We put up loads of bird boxes. There's a colony of 30 to 40 tree sparrows on site, so we put up lots of boxes for them, starling boxes, tree creeper boxes, blue tit, great tit, you name it. It all went through that little woodland. And moving back to the area behind the garage, here it is now. We had a little paved area, did some reclaimed brick walls, and that's a nice seating area, compost area. And just 6 months later, look at the difference. You can see we've planted some more fruit trees in the orchard. As I say, this was an old orchard, so you can see the main trees that were still viable we left, and there's some lovely old twisted gnarled stumps which were absolutely brilliant and provide some great habitat. But this, within its first season, is a really beautiful place to spend an hour or two now. And you can see the wood chip we put through the middle of there to create some pathways. Some red campion you just saw. The hawthorn is now flourishing with flowers, as you can see, in May. And the cow parsley has come back in. Ragged robin was in the seed mix that we sowed, and that of course is a brilliant wildflower in spring for a lot of insects, but just an absolutely gorgeous spot now. And these old twisted stumps just really adding the character back to this ancient orchard, which is just a beautiful place, and images like that really speak for themselves. And of course we could then hang some feeders up. There was a bit more room, and so things like this great spotted woodpecker came back. The tree sparrows loved the additional space, and they are nesting in some of the boxes now, along with some insects, of course, things such as this speckled wood butterfly, ringlet butterfly, which have now moved in because of the grass species and the semi-shady habitat that we had created in this kind of semi-woodland environment now, which is perfect for these butterflies. And the fruit that fell from the trees one year was so much that it attracted, I'm not kidding you, 100 red admiral butterflies. I couldn't keep up with the numbers that were flying about, nectaring on these fallen fruit of these Victoria plums last thing in the season. So an absolute delight for me, and a first, I'm sure, for many of you watching as well. So now if we move on to the third phase of the project, this was the meadow, or the piece of land, a bit of hillside that they bought at the back of the house. The house is to the bottom right hand side of the picture there. And as you can see, it was part of an old orchard, but a couple of the trees had blown over, but they are still alive. There's still fruit every year. But the idea was to come in and increase the biodiversity again for butterflies and insects, and the floral diversity as well. So because it hadn't been managed for a long time, first thing was to bale all the old hay off the site, get it back to, you know, a real good fine thatch, you know, rake everything off the hillside, create these hay bales, which we actually sold to a local farmer who had them for hay. And then it was time to put in the boundary, so of course to mark the part of the hill that the clients had just bought. So we put in a post and rail fence, and that was really kind of the first phase. But after that we then put in a mixed native hedgerow right the way around the fence, because that was just the best thing we could think of to encourage wildlife around the perimeter. And as you can see, just a few months on, it's absolutely flourishing. The hillside is bouncing back to life because of course a lot of those wildflowers were there. That's some Scots pines that we planted as well, by the way. The wildflowers were there, they were just being smothered by grasses, and it hadn't been managed for a while. So as you can see, we've got loads of red clover, meadow buttercup, there's lots of cowslips on the hillside as well. We can see we planted some more trees to try and really encourage the meadow into the garden, to make it feel like one landscape effectively. Some close-ups there of some of the buttercups and the red campion, the red clover, which are just breathtaking. And there's a close-up there of the red clover, which again is brilliant for bees. I can't stress how good that is. A lot of cowslips, as I say now, and even some agrimony as well, which you can see there, a single spike of, which is doing really well. And just those grasses that have come back are absolutely beautiful, just swaying in the breeze. But because of these grasses, again, things such as the meadow brown butterfly move back in. They are a grass-loving species. They of course will lay their eggs on certain grasses, so they really enjoyed the cleared ground, if you like, in the fresh start. And from that, of course, you can see this whole landscape is now, with the fence in the background, the native hedge in front of it, moving on to these fallen apple trees, which are still fruiting. They're still clinging on. Amazing trees. And really that kind of then blends into the woodland at the bottom of the hill, as you can see, and the orchard that we've reinstated. And beyond that is the meadow that we looked at in the first part of the video. So of course the bees moved in even further, because you've got things like wild carrot, which are a great nectar source as well. And we've also got a specific wildflower called pignut, which is actually grown back on the site, we've found on the site, and that is the larval food plant for a beautiful little day flying moth. There's the pignut in the middle there, that white flower, called the chimney sweeper moth. Here it is in all its glory. Doesn't look much, but it really is a cracking little insect, and one that has colonised the site, along with these beautiful marbled white butterflies. What a sight they are. and they've moved in purely because the habitat has been opened up again to allow them to get to those red fescues that they lay their eggs on, those grasses at the bottom. Some great knapweed there again, and a rare shot of a marble white being forced off by a hoverfly. And there's also species such as this meadow vetchling which have come back into the meadow now, and again that is going to help things such as the 5-spot bonnet moth and this 6-spot bonnet moth, who enjoy larval or feeding on that, and the larvae of which feed on that other 5-spot bonnet. And this is a dark green fritillary which has colonised the site now, which is absolutely brilliant. Management again is very simple. It's 1 hay cut a year, so it couldn't be easier. And I hope that's given you some insight as to a wonderful project. Thanks for watching. Please feel free to subscribe and like the video if you've enjoyed it, and I'll be bringing you more videos on all the work I do to come. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.